That is the emotional reunion between 21-year-old Mia Schem and her family. In that video, you can see Mia running towards her mother with open arms. Mia was abducted from the Supernova music festival and appeared in a video released by Hamas 10 days later, pleading for her release. After almost 2 months of being held hostage by Hamas terrorists, Mia was released and reunited with her family on Thursday. Israel says 6 more hostages have been released by Hamas and are being transferred back to Israel by the Red Cross. In exchange for the hostages, 30 Palestinian protesters will be freed. US Secretary of State told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu it was imperative Israel does everything it can to protect Palestinian lives when the fighting recommences.
The way Israel defends itself matters. It's imperative that Israel act in accordance with international humanitarian law and the laws of war, even when confronting a terrorist group that respects neither. In my meetings today with the Prime Minister and senior Israeli officials, I made clear that before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians.
In developing news, the New York Times is reporting that Israel had the blueprints for Hamas's attack on October 7th, a year before it took place. The documents do not specify a date for the attack, but mirror the events of October 7. A document code named Jericho Wall called for a barrage of rocket attacks, followed by a disabling of border security cameras, and finally, an invasion by Hamas soldiers on paragliders and motorcycles. Israeli officials dismissed the plan at the time, claiming it was too aspirational, believing the plan was beyond Hamas's capabilities.
Talk us through what we know about this. This appears on the surface to be pretty damning because so many of these elements within this blueprint happened exactly as was foreseen.
Yeah, so it is an extraordinary revelation, echoes what happened 50 years ago with the Yom Kippur War in October 1973, where intelligence analysis pointed certain directions and didn't quite fully connect all the dots. As a former intelligence analyst, and this is something I teach my students in my honeypots and overcoats class, intelligence analysis involves looking at the capability of a potential adversary and then looking at their intent, their declared and perhaps undeclared intent. And what we saw is the analysis was showing clearly that the capability was emerging, and yet the Hamas had been very clever at hiding its intent. So the leader of Hamas was making noises that were giving signals to the Israelis that workers were going to continue to be able to work inside southern Israel, and that the Gaza monitoring through the gates on the Gaza Strip would be normal, and that the pattern of behaviour was deliberately designed to lull the Israeli security authorities, the intelligence apparatus, into thinking that the intent had not ramped up and was not suddenly going to cross that threshold. Extraordinary outcome.
The thing that confuses me at first blush, not being an expert, but the fact that this was described as, that was an ambition, as in they wanted to do it, but they weren't capable. This is not something that involved, high caliber technology. Paragliders, well, that's pretty easy to conceal that equipment. Motorbikes, that's pretty easy to have them in the tunnels. We know they've been used for various things. And I guess the biggest thing with these bulldozers, but they're also used for construction. So why wouldn't you go, right, what can we do to make sure we're first of all making sure our monitoring will never go offline, and strengthen the wall system as well, that they're not major operations, they're not particularly complicated. Why wouldn't you say, well, given this threat they want to do it at one point, we better ward off the capability for it?
So let's not forget, Israel has had significant mechanisms in place to counter Hamas's capability and to respond to threats at the border. But what's happened is over time, Hamas has been very closely studying Israel and its displacements and its techniques and its risks and vulnerabilities, and it has meanwhile been playing, keeping things relatively on a low simmer in the background, and developing the ability to actually prepare to launch in a way that would catch them off guard. Now, while the plans were there, the same thing was said 50 years ago about the plans. They just didn't seem all that credible. And one of the things, of course, when you think about Hamas has, we know it's got considerable links with Iran. Iran provides considerable support, not only to Hamas, but particularly to Hezbollah. And so when you think about what Hamas might have done, similarly, back in 1973, the Israelis calculated that Egypt couldn't possibly win in a campaign. They hadn't realized that wasn't the purpose that the Israelis were the Egyptians were trying to achieve. In this case as well, I think the calculus was Hamas can't really pull that off. And so they probably played down its significance. But also there's another dimension here. They were Israel, I suspect, was probably looking for signs of signals, communications between Hamas and back to Iran and to Hezbollah, suggesting maybe a three-way coordination, which evidently was missing. And so without that kind of collaboration and corroboration, it didn't seem all that compelling, I guess.
Still, given that threat, as I said, you would think, and again, I'm wary, I'm not the expert in this area, but you would think you could take some sort of relatively low-cost, preparations to avoid it. Just in 30 seconds, John, what does this mean for Netanyahu? He's wanted to avoid any talk of what happens after until the war's finished, but will this mean he can't do that?
He has Golda Meir, the echo of the memory of Golda Meir in his mind. He knows that while she ended up winning the war in the end in 1973, she lost political office. He's trying to avoid that fate. It seems pretty hard for him really to do that. But he has, he's bounced back several times before. He's quite an accomplished politician.
John Blackson, appreciate your time. Thank you.